What's good? Back in here with the second video of the day. As I learn more, the volume is gonna go up. Like I told you guys in a few videos ago, the volume of content's gonna go up. As I keep learning more about the world around us here, the volume of content's gonna go up. And remember, I'm 24 years old, so they say your brain, like your frontal lobes, they reach their full development at around 25, so I'm pretty sure my brain is reaching full development here, in terms of frontal lobes. But yeah, maybe that's the case. But also I'm a late bloomer, so it might still be another couple years until that process kind of ends, and hopefully my channel gets huge by that time that the process ends, so we can just capitalize on it fully. But yeah, basically in this one, I'm just gonna, I'm learning more and more about just how money works and the globalized economy. So basically, a lot of people are here, especially the people that immigrated to the United States within the past, since the US was the dominant global power from the 40s onward. A lot of people are here because of basically the inflation caused by their own country's native currency, because especially after the 70s, because their currency was probably tied to the US dollar, and then the US dollar inflated. So as the US dollar began inflating, all currencies were tied, or at least most developed countries' currencies and developing countries' currencies were tied to the United States dollar. And then once the dollar got off the gold standard in the 70s, when it started just being floating currencies, the more that the US dollar inflated, the more that other countries' currencies inflated. And then the farther you were from the US dollar, the more that your country's currency, the quicker your country's currency inflated compared to the US dollar, if that makes sense. So, and then when I mean farther in terms of the more downstream you were from basically getting loans from the US, pretty much, in that sense. Because the US was seen as the most valuable currency for a while, but then at least at the beginning, and then they were dishing out loans to different countries. And then the farther you were, so let's say a country got a loan from the US, and then a country gave another country a loan, the more downstream you were in that getting of loans, basically, the more susceptible your currency was to inflation, if that makes sense. So for example, my family was in Nigeria. I was born here, actually born in Sacramento, which is why you see the location Sacramento in all these videos. But I was born in Sacramento, but my family is from Nigeria. So my dad moved from Nigeria to here, and then my mom moved after him. And if you look at the time period of when they moved, it was when the Nigerian currency started getting inflated more. At one point, the naira, which is the Nigerian currency, was 1-to-1 with the US dollar. But then as their central government basically started printing money, I think this was around the 70s. I think this was in the 70s, right? Just like the US, basically. But then their currency depreciated at a much faster rate, because we weren't the world reserve currency, and we were kind of downstream in that getting of loans. So once they started printing money, then my dad saw the writing on the wall, right? Because he was smart, and then he didn't want to fight the system, if that makes sense. He could have stayed and fought the system, but then would I have been born Like, would my sister and brother have been born? Like, who knows, right? So, I mean, he ended up leaving, and then my mom followed him. And then the currency went to basically crap, pretty much. The currency went to crap, and then it got to the point where you had to be working, like, for an oil corporation that was working with the government, or you had to be working with the government directly in order to get a proper paycheck. And then what do you know? Like, what is most of my family doing? Like, the ones that are successful, the ones who didn't move, right? What are they doing? Like, you can guess it, right? They're in the national industries, or they're working for the government, and then they have a fairly good life, while most, I don't know about most because I don't live there, but a bunch of people are literally on the streets, no teeth, no food, etc., like no family, etc., etc. And I always went and I always asked, I'm like, why is this happening? And then my family, because I went there once, so I visited, and then I saw this stuff for myself, but like I was way too young. This was in high school, like early high school. I think it was after my freshman year of high school. I was way too young to really understand what was going on. And that was actually when I first started learning about the Illuminati and all this bullshit that I kind of talked to you about in other videos. So I thought like everything was the Illuminati. I literally remember when I went there, every time I saw a triangle, I would lose my mind, like straight up. Every time I saw a triangle or anything that had anything to do with like Illuminati or Rothschilds or anything, like in my mind, I just lost my mind. I was like, dude, Illuminati. And then my brother too, because like he was just kind of copying me basically. Like, it would just be like, oh, Illuminati, 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 like, everywhere. I was like, Illuminati. Like, that was just the time period I was at. Like, and, you know, half the time I was, like, joking, obviously, but even my cousins, they found it funny. My cousins, they were in their 20s at the time, they found it funny. And see, now that I'm actually learning about this shit, they don't find it funny anymore, right? Like, now that I'm actually learning about this stuff and trying to act upon it, they don't find it funny anymore. Which is fun. I mean, now to me, that's funny. To me, I'm the one laughing now. You know, and then also, the more I learn about this, the more I'm like, if I wasn't acting on it, I'd be sad, right? So I'd rather act on it and laugh than, like, just look at it and just be sad. So, basically, but yeah, pretty much, that's the state of Nigeria. Not great. And they say, oh, because the government's corrupt. But now when I'm learning about it, the more I realize it's all about these floating currencies. This is why when people don't learn about it, you just have, even, I don't know if even the leaders in Nigeria, if they completely understand this stuff. Just like in the United States, I don't know if our leaders really completely understand what this central banking and these monetary policies mean. Like, I really don't think. Maybe some of the really old Republicans do, and maybe even the really old Democrats, if they actually, you know, if they I don't know, who knows. Honestly, I don't really even know what goes on in their mind, but, you know, even actually the old Republicans, I'm not sure, but, like, probably the more old people in Congress understand it, because I'm 24 and I'm realizing this stuff. I can't even imagine having decades on my age right now. If you're in your 30s or maybe not 30s, depending on what your previous life was. But I mean, dude, if you're in like your 60s, especially if you work for government and like you didn't see the trend. Some of these people have been in Congress, like Biden, for example. Dude's been in Congress for what, like 4 decades, 5 decades? Come on. Like, to think that he doesn't understand this is like crazy. So if you don't understand it, that's one thing. But then if you do just understand it and you don't, and you're in government and you don't do anything about it, like, see, that's what's called corrupt government, right? That's what they said in Nigeria. They said, oh, the government's corrupt. You know, they said the government, they took money. This is how my family put it before I understood it. They said they took money from the, like, developed countries, and then it's the IMF and United States, right? That's what they're taking money from mostly. Like, the IMF in the United States. So, like, they take loans from those countries, and then rather than using that money to fund public works, they just take the money. Like, I remember there was this one story, I think it was last year or 2 years ago, that I was hearing that a government official in Nigeria had $3 billion, 3 billion US dollars, or I don't know if it was in Naira, but it was the value was 3 billion US dollars, literally in his bedroom. It was hidden. He had 3 billion US dollars hidden in his bedroom, like in his drawers and stuff like that. I mean, come on, right? 3 billion US dollars. Where do you think he got that money? It was probably printed money, loaned out at whatever interest rate, right? So they had to pay it back with interest. But instead of funding public works, he just kept it he literally kept it in his drawer. So, you're talking about corruption, right? And now in the US, because all of those countries were so corrupt, but then it didn't really hit the US yet because they still had more. There's so many countries that will accept US dollars because those dollars are more valuable than their own country's currency. So they'll accept those dollars and pay it back with interest, but then they'll kick the can down the road, right? Just like we do here in the US. But if you don't have the reserve currency, then it just hits you quicker, like the bad effects of it. So other countries, their leaders would just take the money, and in order to pay it back with interest, they would just print their own money and try to pay the interest off with printed money, and keep kicking the can down the road, right? So like the deficits would just keep increasing, but as long as they printed enough money to make the interest payments on time, or like did whatever government policy or monetary policy their central bank had to do to make the interest payments, then they would just keep kicking the can down the road until like a revolution happened, because people didn't have work and they couldn't work for themselves, and maybe enough people actually learned. See, the people actually learning, they either dipped from their country like my dad did, or like they were fighting a long time ago and got disappeared or some shit. But like eventually enough people just get fucked over to where they're actually hungry, so they might not understand the system, but they understand that they don't have money for food, and then they like revolt. So that's what happens a lot. And in Nigeria, shit, they're already much past that. That was like in Fela Kuti's day, right? Which they arrested him for getting foreign I forgot exactly what it was, but it was like he was like trying to trade Naira for other foreign currencies because he realized what we're realizing here on this channel, like the money is worthless. But that was back in the 70s for him, and he got arrested for it. So, and then I think he eventually got killed. Fela Kuti, famous singer, like from Nigeria. Definitely look into his music. You'd be shocked. But so the ones who were aware of it early, like either left or like they got disappeared eventually or some shit, and then eventually enough people realize that they're starving, so then they end up like fighting in the streets and shit. Then now Nigeria's at the point where like there's different factions basically warring against each other, and then even the government, like even the official military is too weak to stop it. Like, so the official military can't even stop the terrorist groups, quote unquote, like, terrorist groups. I mean, who's obviously, like Boko Haram, for example, they're kidnapping daughters and stuff, so they're definitely a terrorist group, but like, is the government a terrorist group too? Like, it just depends on how you look at it. But here in the US, because we don't have as much other countries to screw over, basically, and with that monetary system, we're like screwing over ourselves, if that makes sense. Like our own people were screwing over. We did the same thing as we did in other countries. They issue out loans to people, and then they devalue the currency so much to the point where you get loans in more valuable currency, but then you pay back the loans with less valuable currency, because as you devalue the currency, the loans are like if they're still in the same amount of dollars, depending on the interest rates, you can pay back those loans. If you can pay back those loans if you just get enough of the less valuable money that's printed after, if that makes sense. So as long as the dollar amount's the same, because there's more circulating less valuable dollars, you can get more of those depending on what you're doing to get currency, like depending on what skill you have, etc., or like what business you're running, or whatever you're doing to pay back that currency. As long as that dollar value, like that literal number, is a certain amount, you can pay back that number with less valuable money, which there's more of. Like, I don't know if that makes complete sense. Over time, I'll get better at explaining it as I learn. Like, I've gotten much better at explaining it over the past few months that I've been learning. Like, so I'll get even better with like the next few months of me learning. But basically, that's what it is. Because now we're playing games with the currency, so like with our own currency. Whereas if you're in a country like Nigeria or Venezuela or something like that, you're talking about the dollar versus your own currency. But if you're in the US, you're talking about the dollar like a few years ago versus the dollar now. So because we printed so much money so recently, the dollar of a few years ago, so if you took out loans a few years ago and you have to pay it back now, there's so much less valuable currency now that you can pay back that just number, like that same number that you owe, you can pay that back theoretically more easier, like if you work for the government or do business with the government or whatever. Like if you're involved with working with the government, then you can pay it back easier as long as the government keeps giving you your salary, right? So that's where and that's why we can't raise interest rates also, because so many people have debts denominated in like older, more valuable currency. So if we raise interest rates and then we made it more valuable to hold your currency, then there would be less liquidity. There'd be less people just throwing money around, because it would be more valuable to them to like store it in a bank or something, because then they would be getting interest payments. Like by holding it in a bank, they'd actually be getting more money for doing that instead of like 2 cents or 3 cents, like depending on like I had Chase Bank and I was like literally getting like 2 cents and 3 cents for like putting my money in a bank, and like 1 cent. But back in the day, they were getting like 10% on that shit, like depending on like back at like 20th century. If you put your money in a bank, like now you get barely any money back, basically cents, for putting your money in a bank, unless you're putting in like millions in a bank. But then you would just put it in the stock market or something else, because the returns you get from putting in a bank is basically nothing. But yeah, so but if they raise interest rates, like I said, people would put their money in a bank, so then there wouldn't be as much like money moving around, so it would be even harder for all those people who have debts to pay off that debt, because money wouldn't be as liquid. There'd be less liquidity, which means there'd be less just money moving around quickly. So it would be harder to pay off those debts. So that's why they can't raise interest rates. Because if they raise interest rates, the value of money goes up. Like, because it like essentially costs more to borrow money if they raise interest rates. Because you have to pay back that money with a higher interest rate. So people wouldn't borrow money, they would save money. But now, since you have interest rates at 0, it's free technically to borrow money for a lot of people. Like, to borrow money from I think the discount rate is the rate at which banks borrow money from the Federal Reserve. So if you borrow money from the Federal Reserve, like the Treasury borrows money from the Federal Reserve at like a 0% interest rate. I think that's how it works. So they have to pay basically nothing in interest. They have to pay the principal back, but nothing in interest. But the interest payments of what they borrowed in other years is like so great, and that's why our debt keeps increasing. But yeah, I mean, I'll talk about the money basically more later, because I've been learning so much about that, and that's interesting. But I guess the bottom line of this video is a lot of people are here. Like, a lot of immigrants came here because of the inflation caused, because of the inflation in their own native countries. Like, they came here. So like you're talking about, I mean, I have Lebanese friends, which they're having riots in Lebanon right now, and I sent some of those videos. So that's funny. I mean, that's not funny, but like, it just makes sense, right? So like, Lebanese people, Nigerians, South Americans, Eastern Europeans, etc. A lot of these people are here because of the inflation caused in their countries against the US dollar. And then now a lot of people are actually going to leave the United States because of the inflation of their old dollars. And now, like, they're seeing the same writing on the wall that all these immigrants saw that like left their own countries. It's like, okay, our currency's going to keep getting less and less valuable. Like, is going to keep getting devalued with this monetary policy. And even if they don't understand all of that, all the technicalities behind it, they just see the fact that, okay, a bag of apples costs more now than it used to. Like, a double quarter pounder at McDonald's is like over, I think now it's probably even more, but the last time I bought a double quarter pounder last year, it was like over $11. I mean, dude, think about how much a double quarter pounder used to cost back in the day. But okay, this video is probably 20 minutes, man, like, on accident, just because there's so much to say. Like, my last video was 20 minutes too. I don't even know, just because there's so much shit to say. And I didn't even say like or nearly as much in this video as I do in some of my other ones that are 20 minutes. So man, oh, fuck it. But we'll upload this one. Screw it, man. We're just learning every day here. Like, tell me how much a double quarter pounder is where you live. All right, peace out, guys.